And so he got a job in a tool and die shop where he worked for 40 years, a good union job. He ran the office mostly, although he knew how to run all the machines. It was an absentee owner. It was a little 14-man shop in Lansing Tool and Die, sinking company. And because he had a good union job, he was able to buy a house. There was a 3%. It was a 3% note. It was guaranteed by the federal government as part of the GI Bill. When he'd been going to college, he was actually paid to go to college. It was free. He had the house paid off at the end of 20 or 30 years, I forget which, but certainly it was paid off long before he died in 2006. He had a pension which not only survived him, but paid for my mom too, until the day that she died a couple of years ago. He had every year a couple of weeks of vacation and enough money to save for it. He bought a new car every 3 years, turned the old one in, bought a new one. I mean, this was the American dream. He had it all. He had all he wanted. He had a basement with 20,000 books in it, most of which he had read. I had carved a bedroom out of them. We didn't live high on the hog. The house he bought was a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. He bought in 1956, and there were me and 3 brothers. But it seemed fine to us. And when he died, he had this equity. So that was the American dream. That was always the American dream. Until this kind of lottery culture came along, and now the American dream is to be the next guy who invents Facebook. Right? And that's not, it's just this. You can't build an economy based on a few billionaires. You just can't. It doesn't work. Time magazine, in fact, pointed out that, and does anybody have a copy of my book that I can borrow for a second? Yeah. Thank you. Time magazine pointed out that. And this was nothing unique at the time. I remember this from the 60s. And we went on Amazon and bought several years' worth of Time magazines and just went through them and finally found the article. It pointed out that from the George Washington administration to the Ronald Reagan administration, basically, or the last year of the Carter administration, that as productivity had increased, productivity is the amount of stuff that is produced per unit of labor that's put in. As productivity increased, and it increased dramatically throughout the United States, from Eli Whitney and the cotton gin in the 1830s to the Industrial Revolution and steel and railroads and Reconstruction and then the auto industry, electrification and all, just everything, right? Computers went up. That as productivity went up, wages went up along with it. And in fact, in the book, we've got a graph. It's more recent. It doesn't go all the way back to the Reagan era, or to the George Washington administration. And you probably can't see that from the back. But basically, these two lines just always. This starts in 1947. These two lines always tracked each other. As workers became more productive, that productivity translated into either higher wages or lower working hours. We had the 40-hour work week in the 30s. We had the 50-hour work week back around the turn of the century. We had the 60-hour work week in the late 19th century. And the 70-hour work week really around the time of the Civil War. But in addition to lowering the number of hours that people worked, people made more money. And then productivity continued, right up to, this goes up to 2010. Productivity has continued to rise. We're continuing, our businesses are continuing to make things. But wages have been flat since 1980. So this gap has opened up. Now that gap has 2 pieces to it. One is that as productivity goes up, that means corporate profits go up, but corporate revenues go up. So there's a lot more money to be had. That money, though, has not been going to the middle class because wages have been flat all this time. The average wage earner in the 1960s was around $25,000 a year in today's dollars. And right now, the average wage earner is around $25,000 a year. People like to quote household income, which I think is somewhat deceptive. Household income in the United States is around $42,000, $43,000 per year. But there's a reason why household income has gone from the $25,000 range in the 60s to the $40,000 range now, and that's because there's more than 2 people working in a household, or more than 1 person working in a household, or 1 person working more than 1 job. So what happened as these split apart was that first, in the 70s and the late 70s and throughout the 80s, mom went to work. We used to have single wage earner families, and mom went to work, usually. Sometimes it was dad went to work, but you get the point. 2 people started working, raising a family. And that wasn't quite enough. And so then people said, okay, you know, to maintain our standard of living, let's tap out our house. We got equity in our house. I told you the story of my dad's house. You know, my brothers sold it for, I think, about $100 grand when he died. He bought it for $15,000 way back in the day, in '56. And so let's tap into that equity. And so people are taking, you know, they're taking these home mortgages and all this kind of thing. And they took the equity out of their homes. And then credit cards. I remember back in 1976, I was running a business, myself and a business partner of mine, Terry O'Connor, who just recently passed away. Terry and I were running a business, and that year I made more money than my dad. And my dad was real proud of me, and I was real proud of that fact. And I was, in 1976, I was 25 years old. And I finally qualified for an American Express card for a credit card. I'd never been able to get a credit card. You know, you just in the 60s, 70s, you didn't get a credit card unless they knew you were solid. Not only that, you had to pay the damn thing off every single month. And if you were a day late, they'd take it away from you and say, wait a year before you even apply again. I mean, they were just no nonsense here. Now we have, you know, average credit card debt in the United States, depending on whose numbers you're looking at, runs from $9,000 per person to $27,000 per household. I mean, credit card debt has just exploded. My cat who died last week gets applications for credit cards. I mean, it's just so, and then it was like, okay, you know, what are we going to do now? We've wiped out the house, we've wiped out the credit cards, we've sold the car, and we're renting a car. What are we going to do? Let's throw the kids into debt. You know, I went to college. I didn't graduate. I went to Lansing Community College, Michigan State, and ended up getting thrown out over an anti-war riot, which is a whole other story. But in any case, came out here in '68, lived in People's Park. That's a whole other story. When I went to college, I was able to pay my way through college by working a weekend job as a DJ at WITL, which was absolute minimum wage. And I worked at Bob's Big Boy as a cook and as a dishwasher. And for one day when the waitresses went on strike, I was a waiter. And ever since then, I've been an obscene tipper. Boy, I didn't realize what that job was like. And I worked across the street at the gas station, the Exxon station, replacing tires and brake pads and filling people's gas and stuff like that. So, you know, I got it. You can't do that anymore. When I was going to college, 80% of the cost of college was paid for by state, federal, local governments or colleges themselves. Abe Lincoln came up with this idea of land-grant colleges. Michigan State was one of them, where you give them a big enough chunk of land that the college could work that land and make enough money that the students could go to college for free. And Abe Lincoln wasn't the first idea to come up with this idea of a free college, and he did more than 50 of them. Thomas Jefferson created the University of Virginia, which was the first free college in the United States, and he was so proud of that on his tombstone, it doesn't say President of the United States, it says founder of the University of Virginia, and author of the Virginia Declaration of Religious Freedom and author of the Declaration of Independence. Those were the things he was really proud of. He felt that was his real legacy for future generations, was a free college. Well, 80%, by the time I got there, 80% of it was paid for. So, you know, tuition was, you know, a couple $100s a term, maybe, or I don't frankly remember, but it wasn't a whole lot. It was enough that I could earn working at a gas station. Now, it's flipped upside down. Now, 80% of the cost of college is paid for by tuition, and only 20% is paid for by state, federal, local governments or the colleges themselves, typically. So, you know, we've had this just dramatic change. So anyhow, Time Magazine was looking at this, not looking at what I just described to you, this you know, this gap. This was before the gap, right? This was 1966. The Time Magazine wrote this article. And at this time, ever since George Washington, productivity had followed wages. And so they said, you know, productivity's going up. You got robots, you got computers, you got all these cool things. What are we going to do? You know, what's it going to mean? What's the year 2000 going to be like? You know, 40 years distant. What's the year 2000 going to be like? And they concluded that if wages continue to follow productivity, and I quote, by 2000, the machines will be producing so much that everyone in the U.S. will, in effect, be independently wealthy. With government benefits, even non-working families will have, by one estimate, an annual income of $30,000 to $40,000.